ChatGPT said. After the flight, Mrs. Johnson and her son Michael found themselves at the center of a growing story that reached far beyond the airplane cabin. Their experience touched many people, sparking conversations about respect, fairness, and courage. For Mrs. Johnson, it was a moment of deep reflection. She knew that what happened was not just about her, but about many others who faced unfair treatment every day. Michael used his position as a CEO to speak out against discrimination. He met with leaders at the airline company and pushed them to make real changes. He wanted the company to train all their staff better, to treat every passenger with kindness, and to have clear rules that would stop unfair treatment. Michael believed that change was possible when people in power stood up for what was right. The airline listened. They promised to improve their training programs, focusing on respect and equality. They also said they would create ways for passengers to report any problems safely and easily. This was important because many people feel afraid or unsure about speaking up. Michael and Mrs. Johnson wanted to help give those people a voice. Outside the airline, the story spread on social media. Many people shared their own stories of facing unfairness and praised Mrs. Johnson's quiet strength. They admired Michael's calm and respectful way of standing up for his mother. The story inspired people to think about how they treat others and how they could help create a kinder world. Mrs. Johnson began to receive letters and messages from people who were touched by her story. Some thanked her for showing courage. Others said they felt inspired to speak up when they saw injustice. These messages made her heart full. She understood that her experience had become a symbol of hope for many. Together, Michael and Mrs. Lee Johnson spoke at community events and schools. They shared their story simply and honestly. They talked about the importance of standing up for yourself and others, even when it is hard. Their message was clear. Every person deserves respect and dignity, no matter where they come from or what they look like. In their talks, they also encouraged forgiveness and understanding. Mrs. Johnson spoke about how she accepted the stewardess's apology and believed that people can learn and grow. Michael reminded listeners that kindness and calmness often have more power than anger. Their words helped many people see that change begins with both courage and compassion. Meanwhile, Emily, the stewardess, took important steps in her own life. After the incident, she joined a special training program about diversity and respect. She learned more about the experiences of others and why fairness is so important. Emily spoke openly about her mistake and promised to do better. Her story showed that people can change when they listen and learn. The airline continued to improve. They introduced new policies and made sure their staff understood that every passenger matters. They hired more people from different backgrounds and worked hard to create a welcoming atmosphere. Many passengers noticed the difference and felt safer and more respected. Mrs. Johnson and Michael also worked with other organizations that fight against discrimination. They supported programs that teach kindness and respect in schools and communities. They believed that by helping young people understand fairness early on, the world could become a better place. Their journey was not easy. There were times when they felt tired or discouraged, but they kept moving forward, holding on to hope. They knew that real change takes time, but also that every small step counts. Their story was proof that one moment of courage could inspire many others. At home, Mrs. Johnson and Michael shared quiet moments of joy. They enjoyed their time together, knowing they had made a difference. Mrs. Johnson often smiled when she thought about the flight. She remembered how she stood strong and how her son stood beside her. It was a memory she would carry forever. Their story became a lesson for many of us, a story about respect, strength, and the power of standing up for what is right. It reminded people that fairness is not just a rule, but a way of life. It showed that kindness and courage can change hearts and communities. And so, Mrs. Johnson and Michael continued their work, inspiring others and spreading hope. They knew that the journey toward justice and kindness never truly ends. But with each step, the world becomes a little brighter and more fair for everyone. The plane continued its long journey through the sky, but the mood inside had changed. What had started as a tense and difficult moment had turned into something hopeful and full of promise. Mrs. Johnson was back in first class, surrounded by the quiet comfort of the cabin. She sat proudly, her shoulders straight and her smile gentle but strong. Next to her, her son Michael was calm and watchful, kept his mother close, making sure she felt safe and respected. The flight attendants now treated Mrs. Johnson with care and kindness. They offered her meals with warm smiles and checked on her often. She noticed the difference, and it made her heart feel lighter. What had once been a moment of pain was now turning into a moment of healing. She knew she had the right to be there, and now others were showing her the respect she deserved. Michael spoke with the flight manager, Mr. Collins, once again. This time the conversation was longer and more serious. Michael wanted to be sure the airline understood the problem deeply and that it would make real changes. "This is not just about my mother," Michael said quietly. "It is about how every passenger, no matter who they are, must be treated with dignity." Mr. Collins listened carefully. He agreed and promised that the airline would review its rules and train its staff better. "We must do more to prevent discrimination," he said. "Every person deserves fairness, and this kind of behavior will not be accepted in the future." Michael felt a spark of hope. He knew words were not enough, but it was a start. Around the cabin, the passengers began to talk openly about what had happened. Many shared stories of their own experiences with unfair treatment. Some talked about times they felt invisible or ignored because of their race, age, or background. Listening to these stories, Mrs. Johnson felt a deep connection with others. She was not alone in this struggle. There were many people who needed kindness and respect. A few passengers approached Mrs. Johnson to say kind words. One woman said, "Softly, you showed such courage. You made a difference today." A man nodded and added, "It takes strength to stand up quietly and calmly. You are an inspiration." These words filled Mrs. Johnson's heart with warmth and pride. She smiled and thanked them, feeling the power of community. Emily, the stewardess who had caused the trouble, was quiet for much of the flight. She seemed to be thinking deeply about what had happened. Near the end of the journey, she approached Mrs. Johnson again. Her voice was softer than before. "I want to say I am truly sorry for how I treated you," she said. Mrs. Johnson looked at her kindly and replied, "Thank you for your apology. It means a lot to hear that." Emily explained that she had made a mistake and promised to learn from it. She said, "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I was wrong, and I want to do better." Mrs. Johnson nodded. "We all make mistakes," she said.
Ow.
"What matters is that we try to grow and treat others with kindness." It was a moment of forgiveness and understanding, showing that even difficult moments can lead to positive change. When the plane finally landed, the atmosphere was warm and calm. Passengers helped each other gather their things, and many stopped to shake hands with Mrs. Johnson and Michael. People thanked them for standing up for what was right. It was clear that this flight had changed many hearts. Outside the airport, as Michael helped his mother into the car, they talked about the journey. "I am proud of you, Mother," Michael said softly. "You showed such grace and strength." Mrs. Johnson smiled. "It was not easy," she replied, "but we must keep fighting for respect and fairness wherever we go." Michael promised to take action beyond just this flight. He planned to speak with the airline's headquarters and work with community leaders to raise awareness about discrimination. "We have a chance to make a real difference," he said. "I will use my voice and resources to help others." The story of Mrs. Johnson and her son soon spread beyond the airport. Friends, family, and the public learned about what had happened. The airline made a public statement promising to improve training and ensure all passengers were treated fairly. This included sensitivity training for staff and new policies against discrimination. Many people on social media shared their support for Mrs. Johnson. They praised her courage and Michael's calm leadership. The story inspired conversations about respect, fairness, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Mrs. Johnson and Michael became active voices in the community. They spoke at events and shared their story to encourage others to speak out against injustice. Their message was clear. Everyone deserves kindness and respect, no matter their age, race, or background. The stewardess, Emily, also took steps to change. She completed the airline's sensitivity training and apologized publicly for her actions. She hoped to become a better person and help others understand the importance of fairness. In the weeks and months that followed, the airline made real changes. It improved staff training, updated its policies, and worked to create a welcoming environment for all passengers. Many people noticed the difference and felt hopeful about the future. Mrs. Johnson's story became a symbol of courage and dignity. It reminded people that even in difficult moments, kindness and strength could shine through, showed the power of standing up for justice quietly but firmly. Michael and his mother knew the work was ongoing, but they were ready to keep fighting together. They believed that, with patience, love, and courage, they could help build a world where everyone was treated with the respect they deserved. Their flight was not just a journey through the sky. It was a journey toward a better future, a future where fairness and kindness were for all. ChatGPT said, Mrs. Johnson was a gentlewoman in her 70s. She had lived a long life filled with many memories, some good and some difficult. But through it all, she had always kept her head high and her heart kind. Today, she was about to take a flight on a big airplane. It was a special flight because she was flying first class. Mrs. Johnson had worked hard her whole life, and she enjoyed the small comforts now. She looked forward to the soft seats, the quiet space, and the kindness that usually came with first-class travel. On this day, the airport was very busy. People hurried through the halls with their bags and tickets. Mrs. Johnson moved calmly through the crowd. She had her boarding pass in hand and a small bag over her shoulder. She had flown many times before and knew exactly what to do. She walked steadily to the gate where the plane was waiting. The flight was long, so Mrs. Johnson was glad she had first class.
Oh.
She thought about the journey ahead and the visit to see her son in the big city. Her son, Michael Johnson, was a well-known CEO of a large company. He was a busy man but always made time to see his mother. Mrs. Johnson smiled quietly as she remembered the times they spent together. When it was time to board, Mrs. Johnson showed her boarding pass to the airline worker and stepped onto the plane.
Oh.
She moved through the aisle toward the first-class cabin. The seats were wide and soft, with extra space around them. She settled into her seat by the window and placed her bag carefully beside her. A stewardess named Emily was working in the first-class section. Emily was a young woman who had been with the airline for a few years. At first, she smiled politely at Mrs. Johnson, but as she looked at her, something changed in Emily's expression. She seemed to watch Mrs. Johnson too closely. Her smile disappeared, and she whispered to a colleague nearby. Mrs. Johnson noticed the change but said nothing. She had learned to stay calm in difficult moments. She looked out the window as the plane prepared to take off. She hoped the flight would be peaceful. As the plane lifted off the ground, the cabin lights dimmed. Mrs. Johnson relaxed and closed her eyes for a moment. She enjoyed the quiet hum of the engines. But then, Emily came over again, her voice sharper than before. She said, "Ma'am, I need to speak with you." Mrs. Johnson opened her eyes and nodded. Emily told her that she could not stay in first class and that she had to move to economy. Mrs. Johnson was shocked. She showed Emily her boarding pass and explained, "I have a ticket for first class. I paid for this seat." Emily ignored her words and repeated firmly, "You must move." Other passengers began to look over. Some whispered to each other. Mrs. Johnson felt embarrassed but kept her voice steady. "I do not understand why you are asking me to leave," she said softly. "I have flown many times and never had this problem." Emily's face was cold. She said nothing more but waited for Mrs. Johnson to stand up. The stewardess motioned toward the economy section at the back of the plane. Mrs. Johnson gathered her bag and slowly walked down the aisle, feeling the eyes of others on her. Once in economy, Mrs. Johnson found her assigned seat. It was smaller and closer to the noisy engines. She sat down quietly, but her mind was full of hurt and confusion. How could she be treated this way? She thought about her son and hoped he would understand. Meanwhile, Emily returned to first class and told her story to other crew members. Some seemed surprised, others nodded quietly. The atmosphere felt heavy, as if something was not right. Passengers whispered about what had happened, some showing concern, others just watching. Mrs. Johnson tried to read a book to calm herself. She took slow breaths and reminded herself that she was strong. She knew that this moment was painful, but she would not let it break her spirit. The flight continued, and the hours passed slowly. Suddenly, near the front of the plane, a man stepped onto the aircraft. He was tall, wearing a dark suit and carrying a small briefcase. This was Michael Johnson, Mrs. Johnson's son. He had been delayed but was finally here. He walked confidently toward the first-class cabin, unaware of what had just happened. As he entered first class, he heard whispers and noticed the tense faces. Flight attendants glanced at him nervously. Michael asked quietly, "Where is my mother? I have been waiting for her." The lace stewardess looked down and told him, "She is in economy, sir." Michael frowned, but remained calm. He took a few steps toward the economy section. As he walked, he saw his mother sitting alone. She looked up, surprised but relieved to see him. Michael sat down beside her and gently took her hand. "Mother, what happened?" he asked softly. Mrs. Johnson explained the stewardess's rude demand and how she was asked to leave first class. Michael's face hardened, but he did not raise his voice. Instead, he stood and walked back toward first class to speak with the crew. The passengers watched as the powerful CEO moved through the cabin. They sensed that something important was about to happen. Michael asked to speak with the stewardess named Emily and the flight manager. The crew gathered, feeling the weight of the moment. Michael spoke clearly and with respect. He said, "My mother has a right to be here. She has a first-class ticket. She deserves to be treated with respect." Emily looked uncomfortable. Michael's calm but firm voice made it clear that he expected an answer. The scene was tense but quiet, as passengers whispered among themselves. They'd seen many things on flights before, but this was different. It was about fairness and respect, about standing up for what is right. Michael stayed close to his mother, showing her that she was not alone. The flight continued, but a change had begun. What started as a moment of hurt was now a moment of strength. Mrs. Johnson and her son were ready to face what came next. The flight was more than just a journey through the sky. It was a journey toward justice and dignity. And it all began with a quiet woman who refused to be moved from her rightful place. Minutes passed slowly inside the airplane as the passengers settled into their seats. Mrs. Johnson sat quietly in the economy section, her mind still heavy with the earlier incident. She kept her head held high, but inside, she felt a mix of sadness and anger. How could someone treat her like she did not belong just because of the color of her skin? She thought about her life and the many times she had faced unfairness. But this time, she had her son by her side, and that gave her hope. Meanwhile, Emily, the stewardess who had asked Mrs. Johnson to leave first class, was standing near the front of the plane. She tried to keep a calm face, but inside she was nervous. She had not expected the situation to grow so serious. Other crew members whispered among themselves, wondering what would happen next. Some felt sorry for Mrs. Johnson, while others tried to avoid the issue. The flight manager, a serious man named Mr. Collins, stepped forward to see what was going on. Michael Johnson, the CEO and Mrs. Johnson's son, was speaking quietly but firmly with Mr. Collins and Emily. He explained clearly that his mother had a valid first-class ticket and that she should be treated with respect. "There is no reason for her to be moved," he said. "She deserves the same kindness and service as everyone else in first class." Michael's voice was steady. Showing his strong belief in fairness and justice, Emily looked down and seemed unsure of what to say. She tried to explain herself by saying she was just following rules. But Michael asked, "Which rules? And why were they applied only to my mother?" His questions made it clear that something was wrong. Mr. Collins nodded slowly and said he would look into the matter carefully. Promised to handle the situation fairly. At that moment, several first-class passengers who had watched the scene spoke up. One man said quietly, "I saw what happened. It was not right." Another woman nodded and added, "She belongs in first class. Everyone should be treated with respect." Their voices gave strength to Mrs. Johnson and her son. It was clear that many people did not agree with how Emily had acted. The flight was long, and the atmosphere in the cabin changed. Some passengers looked thoughtful. Others whispered quietly about fairness and kindness. Mrs. Johnson felt a little better knowing she was not alone. She looked at her son, grateful for his support. Michael smiled gently and held her hand, showing that he cared deeply. The flight attendants then came over to Mrs. Johnson in economy. They apologized for the earlier confusion and told her she could return to her first-class seat if she wished. Mrs. Johnson stood up slowly, her heart feeling lighter. She walked back to first class, where several passengers gave her warm smiles. It was a small but important victory. As she settled into her seat again, the stewardess, Emily, approached her. This time, her voice was softer.
"Oh,
"I treated you," she said. Mrs. Johnson nodded and said, "Thank you for your apology." Even though the hurt was still there, Mrs. Johnson believed in forgiveness and understanding. She knew that change began with kindness. Michael watched the exchange quietly. He spoke to the flight manager again, asking about how the airline planned to prevent situations like this in the future. Mr. Collins promised to review training for the staff, focusing on respect and fairness for all passengers. Michael felt hopeful that this experience would lead to better treatment for everyone. Later, Mrs. Johnson enjoyed the rest of her flight. The food was delicious, and the service was kind. She smiled at the people around her and felt proud of standing up for herself. She knew this was not just about one flight, but about fighting for respect wherever she went. The passengers on the plane talked quietly about the event. Some felt inspired by Mrs. Johnson's strength. Others thought about how important it was to treat every person with dignity. The flight became more than just a trip. It became a lesson in respect and courage. When the plane finally landed, Mrs. Johnson and Michael gathered their bags. Many passengers came forward to shake their hands and offer kind words. A young woman said, "You showed us all how to be strong," an older man said. "Thank you for standing up for what is right." These words touched Mrs. Johnson deeply. Outside the airport, Michael helped his mother into a waiting car. They talked about what had happened and how important it was to keep speaking out against unfairness. Michael promised to use his position to help bring change. Mrs. Johnson smiled and said, "Together, we can make a difference." The story of Mrs. Johnson and her son did not end at the airport. It was just the beginning. They shared their experience with friends and family. Michael spoke with the airline's headquarters, urging them to take action. The airline issued a statement promising better training and a stronger commitment to respect for all passengers. Social media picked up the story, and many people shared their support. The incident sparked important conversations about kindness, fairness, and the need to stand against discrimination. Mrs. Johnson became a symbol of courage for many who faced similar struggles. Through it all, Mrs. Johnson remained humble. She did not want to be seen as a hero, but as a person who deserved to be treated fairly. Her journey showed that even in difficult moments, dignity and strength could shine through. Michael and his mother continued to work together to raise awareness. They spoke at events and encouraged others to speak up when they saw injustice. Their message was clear. Respect and kindness must be for everyone, no matter their age, color, or background. The story was a reminder that one small act of courage could change many lives. Mrs. Johnson's flight became a moment where justice and respect won. And it was a moment that would inspire others for years to come. The moment Michael Johnson stood up and made his way toward the front of the plane, a quiet tension filled the cabin. Everyone around sensed that something important was happening. His calm but firm steps showed he meant business, and many passengers watched him closely. They saw a powerful man, well-dressed and confident, moving with purpose. He was not angry, but he was serious. Michael approached Emily, the stewardess who had earlier asked his mother to leave first class. She looked up nervously as he stopped before her, spoke clearly and politely, but his words held strength. "I want to understand why you asked my mother to move from first class," he said. Emily shifted uncomfortably. She was no longer the confident woman who had spoken to Mrs. Johnson harshly. Now she seemed unsure and uneasy. "I was just following the rules," Emily answered quietly. "I'm sorry if I upset her." Michael nodded but pressed further. "Which rules? Why were they applied only to my mother?" "I want to be sure this does not happen again." Emily had no good answer. She looked around, realizing that many passengers were now listening. At that moment, flight manager Mr. Collins came forward. He was a serious man in his 50s with gray hair and kind eyes. Michael greeted him and explained the situation. Once more, Mr. Collins promised to investigate carefully, said we take these matters very seriously. Every passenger deserves respect and kindness. Michael appreciated the words but wanted to see action, not just promises. Passengers around the cabin whispered quietly among themselves. Many were surprised to see a CEO standing up so calmly for his mother. Some admired his strength and sense of justice. Others felt shamed that such an incident had happened on their flight. But the mood was changing from silence to support. Michael then turned to the other crew members and said, "Please make sure my mother is treated with full respect and service for the rest of this flight." The attendants nodded and promised to do so. It was clear the stewardess Emily's behavior was no longer accepted. Michael made it clear that discrimination had no place here. Mrs. Johnson, sitting nearby in economy, watched all this with a mixture of relief and pride. She saw her son taking charge, but also staying respectful and calm. It made her feel strong. She thought, this is what change looks like, standing up quietly but firmly. Her heart lifted as she saw people around the plane begin to nod. In agreement, the flight continued. The crew approached Mrs. Johnson to invite her back to her original seat in first class. She accepted with grace, walking through the cabin with her head held high. Other passengers gave her warm smiles, and some clapped softly. It was a moment of victory for dignity and respect. Michael sat beside his mother once again. He gently took her hand and said, "You belong here. Nobody can take that away." Mrs. Johnson smiled and said, "Thank you, my son. Your support means everything to me." They shared a quiet moment, both feeling the power of standing up for what is right. Later, Michael spoke again with the flight manager, asking about the airline's plans to improve training for staff. He wanted to ensure that no one else would face the same unfair treatment. Mr. Collins promised to organize sensitivity workshops and refresh staff on the importance of respect for all passengers. Michael said this must be a turning point. Passengers continued their journey, and the atmosphere in the cabin changed for the better. People talked quietly about fairness, kindness, and the importance of standing up against discrimination. Mrs. Johnson felt the warmth of support around her. It reminded her that even in hard times, people could come together for good. During the flight, Michael also spoke with other first-class passengers who expressed admiration for Mrs. Johnson's courage and the way he handled the situation. One man said, "You both set a great example. We need more of this in the world." A woman added, "It's inspiring to see respect win over prejudice." The stewardess Emily, now quieter and more reflective, helped serve Mrs. Johnson with care. She had learned a difficult lesson about kindness and fairness. She realized that her earlier actions had hurt someone who deserved better. This moment was not just a correction, but a chance for growth. When the plane landed, Michael and Mrs. Johnson gathered their belongings. As they walked off the plane, several passengers approached to offer kind words. A young woman said, "Thank you for showing us how to stand up with grace." An older man added, "You have made a difference today." These words touched Mrs. Johnson deeply, filling her heart with hope. Outside the airport, Michael helped his mother into a waiting car. They talked about the journey and the importance of speaking out. Michael promised to use his influence to help bring change to the airline and beyond. Mrs. Johnson smiled softly, knowing they were only beginning to make a difference. The story of the flight quickly spread. Friends and family heard about the incident and how Michael stood up for his mother. Social media picked up the story, and many people shared their support. The airline released a statement promising to improve training and make sure all passengers were treated fairly. Michael and Mrs. Johnson became voices for change. They spoke at community events and encouraged others to stand up when they saw injustice. Their message was simple: respect and kindness should be for everyone, no matter their age, race, or background. The flight that started with hurt ended with hope. Mrs. Johnson's strength and Michael's calm leadership showed that fairness could win. It was a story that inspired many and reminded people of the power of dignity and courage as they moved forward. Michael and his mother knew the work was not done, but they were ready to face it together with patience and love. They believed that change begins with small actions and that every voice matters. The journey was more than just a flight through the sky. It was a journey toward justice, respect, and a better future for all. And it started with a mother and son who refused to accept anything less than fairness.